Parents spent $570,000 on a wedding, but refused to save my daughter's life. Now, they expect me to save them. Hey everyone, before we begin the story, take a moment to support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support means the world to our channel and helps us spread more shocking, true stories to light. Now, let's get started. I've been holding on to this story for a long time, but I think it's finally time to let it out. Maybe writing it all down will help me process what happened. My name is Daniel, but most people call me Dan. I'm 32, and I run a small interior design business in Austin. It's nothing flashy, but it pays the bills, keeps a roof over our heads, and lets me take care of my wife. Let's call her Emma, and our 8-year-old daughter, Lily. We live a simple but happy life. A cozy apartment, food on the table, no major financial stress. Just normal, everyday happiness. But my parents? Oh, they live in a completely different world. Their names are Mike and Susan, and they own a furniture store that they market as luxury. Truth is, they're not actually rich, they just pretend to be. They have this big, overpriced house in an expensive neighborhood, drive fancy cars they can barely afford, and throw extravagant weekend parties for people who aren't really their friends. Just business connections they want to impress. To them, image is everything. Growing up as their eldest son was brutal. No way to sugarcoat it. My younger brother, Ryan, was the golden child, and they didn't even try to hide it. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't maybe I'm overthinking this. It was blatant. I'd bring home straight A's, barely got a nod of acknowledgement. Ryan, on the other hand, if he managed to scrape by with a B+, they'd act like he was the second coming of Einstein, throw a party, invite their friends, order a cake with our genius son written on it. When I left for college, my dad gave me a stiff handshake, and my mom barely looked up from her phone when she said, "Call us when you get there." But when Ryan enrolled in community college, still living at home, mind you, they threw him a massive going-away party, catered and everything, as if he were off to Harvard. That's when I knew, if I wanted anything in life, I'd have to build it on my own. I never expected much from my parents after that. But when the moment came that I needed them the most, when my daughter's life was on the line, they did something so cruel, so unthinkable, that it shattered any last hope I had in them. And later, when they came to me for help, well, let's just say karma has a funny way of coming back around. Building my life from nothing. After graduating from college, I landed a job at a small interior design firm in Austin. It wasn't glamorous, just an entry-level design assistant position, but I loved it. There was something deeply satisfying about transforming a space, creating something that meant something to people. School had never made me feel that way. For years, I worked my ass off, learning everything I could. Eventually, I saved up enough to start my own company. And when I say company, I mean me, alone, working from our apartment. No investors, no family connections, no startup capital. Just me, hustling. That's when I met Emma. She walked into a small furniture showroom I had set up downtown. Meant to be a quick visit, just another client, but somehow we ended up talking for over an hour. Not about furniture, not about business, but about books, music, life. We just clicked. A year later, we got married. It wasn't some extravagant, over-the-top wedding. No luxury venue, no ridiculous price tag. Just a simple, beautiful ceremony with close friends and family. My parents showed up, but they made it clear they were only there out of obligation. My mother kept checking the time, like she had somewhere better to be, and my father barely spoke to anyone. But I didn't care. I had Emma. I had real love. That's all that mattered. Then, a year later, we had Lily. She was perfect. This little girl with Emma's bright, curious eyes and my stubborn streak. She was everything to us. Life wasn't Instagram perfect, but it was good. Emma was teaching preschool, and my design business was slowly growing. We weren't rolling in money, but we were making it work. If I could go back in time and change just one thing, though, it would be this. We didn't get health insurance. As a small business owner, I didn't have employer-provided coverage, and private plans were ridiculously expensive. Since we were all healthy, we figured we could wait a little longer until the business was more stable. That was the worst mistake of my life. Because when Lily got sick, everything changed. Something was wrong. Lily was always a ball of energy, running around, laughing, getting into everything like toddlers do. But when she turned 3, she developed this cough that just wouldn't go away. At first, we thought it was just a cold. Every parent knows that toddlers are basically walking germ factories. They catch everything. But then it got worse. She started getting tired all the time, which wasn't like her at all. She stopped eating as much, ran a constant low-grade fever, and sometimes, out of nowhere, she would just stop playing to catch her breath. Emma was the first to say it. "Something's not right, Dan. This isn't just a cold." But I was in denial. I told her, "Let's give it another couple of days. Kids get sick all the time." I will never forgive myself for saying that. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Emma was playing with Lily in the living room when, out of nowhere, our daughter just collapsed. 1 second, she was giggling. The next, she was lying on the floor, looking up at Emma with unfocused eyes. And in the weakest, most fragile voice I'd ever heard, she whispered, "Mommy, I'm so tired." Emma screamed for me. I was in the middle of a client meeting, but I didn't even say goodbye. I just ran. When I got home, Lily was breathing too fast, her little chest rising and falling like she had just run a marathon. Her skin was clammy, her eyes barely staying open. I didn't think. I just grabbed her and drove straight to the ER, Emma right there in the back seat, begging Lily to stay awake the whole way. The hospital didn't make us wait. They took her back immediately, which was both a relief and absolutely terrifying. Because when hospitals act fast, it usually means it's serious. And God, it was the worst news of my life. The doctor came back hours later, holding a chart with a grim look on his face. I knew. Before he even spoke, I knew. "Mr. Carter, we found a congenital abnormality in Lily's lung. It's compressing her airway. She needs surgery immediately." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This had to be a mistake. A lung problem? In my 3-year-old? This kind of thing happens to other families, right? Not mine. Not to my little girl. But there was no mistake. And then came the second blow. A woman from the hospital's billing office pulled us aside and handed me a piece of paper. The number on it made me feel like I'd been punched in the gut. $120,000. "We can proceed with the surgery immediately," she said. "But the hospital needs assurance that you can cover the costs. Do you have insurance?" I just stood there, numb. I turned to Emma, my hand shaking, and whispered, "We don't have it. We were waiting." And in that moment, I realized just how badly I'd screwed up. I had been trying to be responsible, waiting until we could comfortably afford health insurance. But now, because of that decision, our baby girl was the one paying the price. I looked back at the woman and choked out. "We'll find the money. Just save my daughter." But inside, I was panicking. Where the hell do you get $120,000 that fast? We had about $25,000 in savings. I could sell my car for another $15,000. That still left us $80,000 short. And then I thought about my parents. They weren't billionaires, but they had money. They owned a business, a big house, expensive cars. I didn't expect them to hand over the full amount. But surely they'd at least help, right? Surely they wouldn't just stand by while their granddaughter's life was on the line. Even if they had always treated me like I was second best, surely this was different. Surely, this time, they'd come through. So after making sure Lily was stable and that Emma wasn't alone, I got in my car and drove straight to their house. The entire way there, my hands were shaking. My stomach was twisted in knots. I've never been good at asking for help, but this wasn't about me. This was about Lily. I pulled up to their house, praying they would understand. But the moment I rang the doorbell, I knew. I could hear music, laughter, clinking glasses. They were having a party. While my daughter was in the hospital, fighting for her life, they were throwing a goddamn party. And that's when I realized I was about to beg for my daughter's life, and they wouldn't even care, begging my parents for help. I stood there, fists clenched, staring at the door while the sound of laughter and music poured out from inside. I rang the doorbell 5 times before someone finally answered. It was my mother. She stood there in a sleek black dress, dripping in jewelry, holding a glass of wine in one perfectly manicured hand. Behind her, I could see their house packed with people. Men in suits, women in cocktail dresses, servers weaving through the crowd with trays of food. It was a party, a big one. Her expression flickered with annoyance, when she saw me. Dan, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharp, like I was ruining something. I took a deep breath. Stay calm, done. Just explain. Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad. It's urgent. It's about Lily. She frowned. Can it wait? We're in the middle of something. Wait? My daughter was in the hospital, and she was asking if it could wait? No, it can't wait, I snapped. It's an emergency. She sighed. Actually sighed like I was inconveniencing her, then turned and disappeared into the party to find my father. I stood there in their massive foyer, surrounded by marble floors and crystal chandeliers, listening to the sound of wealth and privilege, of people who had no idea what it was like to sit in a hospital room and wonder if their child was going to wake up the next morning. Then I overheard someone mention Ryan's name. That's when I realized what this party was. It was an engagement party for my brother. They hadn't even told me he was getting married. I felt like I was going to be sick. A few minutes later, my dad finally appeared, looking irritated, like I had just pulled him away from something important. Dan, what is this about? We're in the middle of Ryan's engagement party. I forced myself to stay calm. Dad, listen. Lily is in the hospital. She has a congenital abnormality in her lung. It's compressing her airway. She needs emergency surgery. I waited for the panic, the concern, the desperation that any normal grandparent would feel in that moment. But nothing came. Nothing. Not a single question about her condition. Not even a flicker of worry on their faces. My mother barely glanced at me before looking back at the party. My father just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to get to the point. I swallowed hard and continued. The hospital needs $120,000 up front before they can operate. I've pulled together $40,000, but I'm still short. Can you help? I don't need all of it, just enough to get them to start the surgery. I braced myself for relief. For them to say, of course, Dan, we'll do whatever it takes. Instead, my mother slowly put down her wine glass and said, Dan, we've already planned Ryan's wedding. We can't cancel or postpone it now. I felt like I had just been slapped. I blinked. What does Ryan's wedding have to do with Lily's surgery? My father exhaled through his nose, his expression tightening. Then he said the words that I will never forget for as long as I live. We've already spent $570,000 on Ryan's wedding. If we give you that money now, the wedding won't happen. I just stood there, staring at them, trying to process what they had just said. They had $500,000 to throw on a wedding, but not a dime to save their granddaughter's life. Desperation turns to betrayal. I looked across the room and spotted Ryan, standing in an expensive designer suit, holding a champagne glass, laughing with his friends. My golden child brother, the one they had always put first. I stormed over to him, my heart pounding. Ryan, can we talk? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked annoyed, but followed me to a quieter corner of the house. I explained everything, Lily's condition, the surgery, the money. I waited for him to care, to say something like, dude, we'll postpone the wedding. My niece's life is more important. But instead, he just sighed and said, that sucks, man. But what do you want me to do about it? I cannot believe what I was hearing. Ryan, you guys are spending almost $600,000 on a wedding. I just need $80,000. Can't you cut back? Have a normal wedding like normal people. And you know what he did? He laughed. Laughed. Do you know how long we've been planning this? He scoffed. Jen's family is expecting a certain kind of event. We've got guests flying in from all over. Deposits have been paid. It's not that simple. I felt desperate, helpless. And then, in a moment of pure, soul-crushing humility, I did something I never thought I would do. Right there, in the middle of their fancy party, surrounded by their fancy friends, I fell to my knees. I begged, please, Ryan, I'm begging you. Just help us with part of it. I'll pay you back, I swear. But if Lily doesn't get this surgery, she's going to die. I looked up at him, my hands shaking, hoping, praying that there was still a heart inside him. But instead, he took a step back like I was something dirty. His face turned red, embarrassed because people were watching. Jesus, Dan, get up, he hissed. You're embarrassing yourself. Then, louder, so the crowd could hear, he added, look, I have a responsibility to Jen and the family we're building. I can't just throw away our wedding plans. I'm sorry about Lily, but I can't help. And with that, he turned away from me. My father appeared beside me, placing a cold hand on my shoulder. Get up, Dan. Stop embarrassing the family. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we'll figure something out. Just stop embarrassing us. I slowly got to my feet, looked at each of them. My mother, still glancing back at the party, my father, his jaw clenched in anger, and Ryan, already rejoining his friends. I took a breath, my voice shaking as I said, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Ryan. Today, I finally understand who my real family is and who are just strangers." And then I walked out, didn't look back, didn't say another word. It was pouring when I stepped outside, the kind of heavy rain that soaks you in seconds. I just stood there, letting it wash over me, my hands trembling at my sides. I had just begged my family for help, and they had turned their backs on me. I climbed into my car, slammed the door, and then I broke. I sobbed like a child, because I had no idea how I was going to save my daughter. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never ask those people for help again. Next part coming soon. Let me know if you want any tweaks before I continue. Ban da noi? Continue. Chat da noi? Got it. Here's the next part of the story. A real family steps in. I don't know how long I sat there in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, my whole body shaking. It wasn't just anger. It was heartbreak, betrayal, complete and utter despair. But I couldn't stay in that moment. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and drove back to the hospital. Lily was still there, fighting. Emma was still there, waiting. I didn't have the luxury of breaking down. I had to find another way. When I got back, I was shocked to see Emma's parents standing in the hospital waiting room. They had driven in from San Antonio the second Emma called them. Now, let me be clear, my in-laws are not wealthy people. My father-in-law is a plumber. My mother-in-law works part-time at a grocery store. They don't throw parties. They don't care about keeping up appearances. They're just good, hardworking people. My mother-in-law rushed to me the second she saw me. She grabbed my hands, her eyes red from crying. "Dan, did you talk to your parents? Will they help?" I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head, and the look on her face, it was like she could feel my pain as if it were her own. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug, like I was her own son. My father-in-law walked up beside us and put his hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, son. We'll figure out ourselves." And that was the moment I realized something important. I had been looking for help in the wrong place. My parents? They were just people I happened to share DNA with. But this was real family, selling everything to save my daughter. The next morning, I got up and went to work. Not my actual job, no, my new job. My job was now to raise $80,000. And I was going to do it by any means necessary. First, I sold my car. Gone. $15,000 in cash. Then, I emptied our entire savings. $25,000. I started calling everyone I knew. Friends, coworkers, old acquaintances. I didn't care how embarrassing it was. I asked. And you know what? People stepped up. One of my employees, who had only been working for me for 6 months, handed me $500 and said, "Boss, this is all I can afford, but I want to help." An old coworker I hadn't spoken to in years somehow heard what was happening and sent me $3,000. Even people I barely knew were Venmoing me money. It was overwhelming, but we were still short. And then, my father-in-law's phone rang. He stepped away to take the call, and when he came back, his face was unreadable. He whispered something to my mother-in-law. She wiped a tear from her cheek, then turned to me. "Dan, how much more do you need?" I swallowed hard. 40,000. My father-in-law nodded, then said the words that broke me all over again, but in a completely different way. "All right, come pick up the money tomorrow morning." I froze. Where are you getting that kind of money?" My father-in-law let out a soft chuckle, but wasn't happy. "We sold our house. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe." You what?" My mother-in-law squeezed my hand. "It's just a house, Dan. Lily's life is more important. If she gets better, it's worth it." I just stood there, staring at them. These two people, who weren't even my blood, had just given up their home to save my daughter. Meanwhile, my own parents were sipping champagne at a $570,000 wedding. Emma burst into tears and hugged them. I couldn't even form words. All I could do was whisper, "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." And you know what my mother-in-law said? Family helps family. That's just what we do. So simple. And yet, my own parents had never understood it. Lily's surgery and a new beginning. With the money finally secured, the hospital scheduled Lily's surgery for the next morning. I don't even have words for how terrifying it was. Emma and I sat in the waiting room, silent, unable to speak. The hours dragged. Every time the door opened, I thought I was going to pass out. And then, finally, the surgeon came out. He smiled. The procedure went very well. She'll recover gradually. I collapsed into a chair and let out a sob of pure relief. Emma was crying. My in-laws were crying. But these were good tears. 2 weeks later, Lily was released from the hospital. She got stronger every day. One day, as I pushed her wheelchair toward the car, she looked up at me, grinning, and said, "Daddy, I want to run and play again." And I broke down all over again. But this time, these were the best tears of my life, turning pain into power. After Lily recovered, I made a decision. I was done being the guy who needed to beg. I was done feeling powerless. So I threw myself into my business. I woke up at 5 a.m. every day, worked 16-hour shifts, studied everything I could about business, investments, growth. I wasn't just doing small interior design jobs anymore. I was bidding on hotels, shopping centers, office buildings. 3 years later, my company had grown 5 times bigger. I had 28 employees. My name started showing up in business magazines. I didn't have to call clients anymore. They were calling me. And then, one day, a journalist asked me, "What motivated you to succeed?" And I told them the truth. I told them how my own family turned their backs on me, how they spent $570,000 on a wedding while their granddaughter was fighting for her life. I named names. I held nothing back. And when that article dropped, it exploded. People were furious. And my parents? Their furniture business collapsed. Their reputation was destroyed. Ryan? His wife left him. She called me herself and said, "I had no idea what kind of man I married. I can't stay with someone who did that to his own niece." And just like that, the people who abandoned me, they ended up with nothing. But did it feel good? At first, yes. But then, it just felt empty. Because revenge wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that Lily was healthy. What mattered was that I had real family, Emma, Lily, my in-laws, my friends. So one day, I made a new choice. I went back to every person who helped me, and I paid them back, tenfold. And as for my in-laws, I tracked down the man who bought their house. I bought it back, and the day I handed them the keys, my mother-in-law cried. My father-in-law put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I never doubted you, son." And that was the moment I truly won. The moment they came crawling back. Life was finally good. Lily was healthy. Emma and I were expecting our second child. My business was thriving. I had real family, Emma, my in-laws, my friends, the people who had stood by me when everything fell apart. And my parents? They had nothing. Their business? Destroyed. Their fake friends? Gone. Ryan? Divorced, broke, and alone. I never reached out to them, never checked in to see how they were doing. I didn't care. But then, a few months ago, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Dan, it's Mom. That voice, the same voice that had watched me beg and turn away, now sounded shaky. Desperate. Can you help us? I felt my stomach turn. I didn't say anything, just let her talk. And oh, she talked. She explained how they were in serious debt, how they had lost everything, how the bank was about to foreclose on their house. "We just need $200,000 to keep the house, Dan. We know you have it. We're still family." I almost laughed. $200,000. I remembered needing just $120,000 to save Lily's life. I remember my mother sipping wine at a $570,000 party while I begged for my daughter. I remember my father telling me to stop embarrassing the family. And now, they needed me? Oh, the audacity. But I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to curse them out. No, if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. "Of course, Mom," I said smoothly. "Why don't we meet for coffee and talk about it?" Her tone lit up with hope. "Oh, Dan, thank you. We knew you wouldn't turn your back on us." Funny how that works. We met at a high-end cafe downtown. When they arrived, They looked desperate, like they hadn't slept in days. For the first time in my life, they actually looked nervous around me. I let them talk. I let them ramble about how hard things had been, how they never expected this to happen, how unfair it was. Then, finally, they got to the point. Dan, can you help us? I pulled out my wallet, set $200 bills on the table. Lean back. Drinks are on me, I said casually. Their faces fell. My dad's jaw clenched. My mom's eyes turned glassy. Dan, you're joking, right? My dad muttered. I smirked. Oh, so now parties are a bad way to spend money. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and looked at them one last time. Funny how that works. Then, I walked out, and I never looked back. The true victory. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to suffer. Because in the end, I had already won. When I got home that night, Lily came running to me, wrapping her arms around my waist, giggling. Emma was in the kitchen, laughing with her parents as they planned the baby's shower. A real celebration. One filled with love, not status. I walked over, kissed Emma, hugged my in-laws, and sat down with my real family. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt at peace. What would you have done? So what do you guys think? If you were in my shoes, would you have forgiven them? Would you have helped? Or would you have walked away like I did? Let me know in the comments. And remember, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters most. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.